Hi guys, good morning. Happy Tuesday. It's another gloomy one it looks like, so it's a good day to just kind of sit back curled up on your couch with a cup of coffee and a good book. So that's what I'm going to do here. Feel free to join me. We're going to be really on the bottom of 49 today, and actually we'll be mostly starting on 50. And where we left off, Captain Beatty had just showed up to Montag's house. So he's having this conversation with his wife, and they're kind of going back and forth about how they don't have these memories together. And he's really just kind of reflecting the whole time on how he really just doesn't really know this woman, and they don't have a real relationship. And he kind of has this epiphany that he really isn't happy. And in the midst of all this, Captain Beatty shows up. And what I think is really interesting about this scene is first he's going to kind of describe the purposes of firemen and why they're important to this society. But then throughout this conversation, especially towards the end, he's going to kind of insinuate that maybe Montag has books. And I think the question that I always come back to, and what I'll probably ask you tomorrow if you're on the live stream, is does he know that Montag has books? I think that's the interesting question here. So we'll start with the very bottom of 49, and we'll roll from there. So go ahead and get your cup of coffee and your book out, and we'll go ahead and get started. Mildred said, "Well, now you've done it. Out front of the house. Look who's here." "I don't care." "There's a Phoenix car just drove up and a man in a black shirt and an orange snake stitched on his arm coming up the front walk." "Captain Beatty?" he said. "Captain Beatty." Montag did not move, but stood looking into the cold whiteness of the wall immediately before him. Go let him in, will you? Tell him I'm sick." "Tell him yourself." She ran a few steps this way, a few steps that, and stopped, eyes wide, when the front door speaker called her name softly, softly. "Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone here, someone here. Mrs. Montag, Mrs. Montag, someone's here." Fading. Montag made sure the book was well hidden behind the pillow, which I feel like I would find a better spot than just under the pillow. I don't know. Climbed slowly back into bed, arranged the covers over his knees and across his chest, half sitting, and after a while Mildred moved and went out of the room, and Captain Beatty strolled in, his hands in his pockets. "Shut the relatives up," said Beatty, looking around at everything except Montag and his wife. See how he's like kind of searching around, you know what I mean? Like he's looking around the room. I feel like he's looking for something. This time Mildred ran. The yammering voices stopped yelling in the parlor. Captain Beatty sat down in the most comfortable chair with a peaceful look on his ruddy face. He took time to prepare and light his brass pipe and puff out a great smoke cloud. "Just thought I'd come by and see how the sick man is." "How'd you guess?" Beatty smiled his smile, which showed the candy pinkness of his gums and the tiny candy whiteness of his teeth. "I've seen it all. You were going to call for a night off." Montag sat in bed. "Well," said Beatty, "take the night off." He examined the eternal matchbox, the lid of which said, "Guaranteed, 1,000,000 lights in the igniter," and began to strike the chemical match abstractly, blow out, strike, speak a few words, blow out. He looked at the flame. He blew. He looked at the smoke. "When will you be well?" "Tomorrow. The next day, maybe. First of the week." Beatty puffed his pipe. "Every fireman, sooner or later, hits this. They only need understanding, to know how the wheels run, need to know the history of our profession. They don't feed it to rookies like they used to. Damn shame." Puff. "Only fire chiefs remember it now." Puff. "I'll let you in on it." And that's what I think is so interesting about Beatty. He's actually a really smart character, and he kind of sees through Montag here. He notices that Montag isn't really sick. He's just incredibly upset about what happened the night before, and so that's why Beatty's there. It's not because he thinks that Montag's sick. I think the primary reason is he knows that Montag's upset over what happened, and that's why he wants to give him this little talk about why they're needed. Mildred fidgeted. Beatty took a full minute to settle himself in and think back for what he wanted to say. "When did it all start, you ask, this job of ours? How did it come about? Where? When? Well, I'd say it really got started around about a thing called the Civil War. Even though our rule book claims it was founded earlier, the fact is we didn't get along well until photography came into its own. Then, motion pictures in the early 20th century, radio, television, things began to have mass. Montag sat in bed, not moving. And because they had mass, they became simpler, said Beatty. Once, books appealed to a few people, here, there, everywhere. They could afford to be different. The world was roomy. But then the world got full of eyes and elbows and mouths, double, triple, quadruple population. Films and radios, magazines, books, leveled down to a sort of paste puddling norm. Do you follow me? I think so. Beatty peered at the smoke pattern he had put on out on the air. Picture it, 19th century man with his horses, dogs, carts, slow motion. Then in the 20th century, speed up your camera, books cut shorter, condensations, digests, tabloids. Everything boils down to the gag, the snap ending. Snap ending. Mildred nodded. Classics cut to fit 15-minute radio shows, then cut again to fill a 2-minute book column, winding up at last as a 10 or 12-line dictionary resume. I exaggerate, of course. The dictionaries were for reference, but many were those whose sole knowledge of Hamlet. You know the title is certainly Montag. It is probably only a faint rumor of a title to you, Mrs. Montag. Whose sole knowledge, as I say, of Hamlet was of a one-page digest in a book that claimed, "Now at last you can read all the classics. Keep up with your neighbors." Do you see? Out of the nursery into the college and back to the nursery. There's your intellectual pattern for the past 5 centuries or more. And really, what he just details right there is that books just became dumbed down. And this is actually something that happens. There are Reader's Digest versions of books, which are basically like simplified, dumbed down versions of books. I know of podcasts that trim down books to make them more accessible. So basically, what he's saying is as society progressed, books got dumbed down and simplified because people just had, well, too short of attention spans for starters, and they were just trying to consume so much. So that was the first kind of domino that fell, was that books were just getting dumbed down. Mildred arose and began to move around the room, picking things up and putting them down. Bee ignored her and continued. Speed up the film, Montag, quick. Click, pick, look, I, now flick, here, there, swift pace, up, down, in, out, why, how, who, what, where, bang, smack, wallet, bing, bong, boom. Digest, 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 digest. Politics? One column, 2 sentences, a headline, then in midair all vanishes. Whirl man's mind around about so fast into the pumping hands of publishers, exploiters, broadcasts, that the centrifuge flings off all unnecessary, time-wasting thought. And so then he's saying that we just began getting bombarded by so many different messages and so much different content, which is kind of true today, right? Like, think about all the headlines and the memes and things that are just bombarded to you on Facebook. Like, it's almost information overload, and that's what he's kind of describing right here. Mildred smoothed the bedcloths. Montag felt his heart jump and jump again as she patted his pillow. Right now she was pulling at his shoulder to try to get him to move so she could take the pillow out and fix it nicely and put it back. And perhaps cry out and stare, or simply reach down her hand and say, "What's this?" and hold up the hidden book with touching innocence. School is shortened, discipline relaxed, philosophies, histories, languages dropped, English and spelling gradually neglected. Totally true, right? Even today, I think. Finally, almost completely ignored. Life is immediate. The job counts. Pleasure lies all about after work. Why learn anything save pressing buttons, pulling switches, fitting nuts and bolts? Let me fix your pillow, said Mildred. No, whispered Montag. The zipper displaces the button, and a man lacks just that much time to think about dressing at dawn. A philosophical hour, and thus a melancholy hour. Mildred said, Here, go away, said Montag. Life becomes one big pratfall, Montag. Everything bang, buff, and wow. Wow, said Mildred, yanking at the pillow. For God's sake, let me be, cried Montag passionately. This is like one of my favorite scenes in the whole book, just like visualizing how Beatty's just sitting right there. And Mildred, I mean, she's got good intentions, I guess, but she's trying to fix this pillow where the book is, and it's just kind of a funny visual, I think. Beatty opened his eyes wide. Mildred's hand had frozen behind the pillow. Her fingers were tracing the book's outline, and as the shape became familiar, her face looked surprised and then stunned. Her mouth opened to ask a question. Empty the theaters save for clowns, and furnish the rooms with glass walls and pretty colors running up and down the walls like confetti or blood or sherry or sodarine. You like baseball, don't you, Montag? Baseball's a fine game. Now Beatty was almost invisible, a voice somewhere behind a screen of smoke. What's this? Asked Mildred, almost with delight. Montag heaved back behind against her arms. What's this here? Sit down, Montag shouted. She jumped away, her hands empty. We're talking. Beatty went on as if nothing had happened. You like bowling, don't you, Montag? Bowling, yes. And golf? Golf is a fine game. Basketball? A fine game. Billiards, pool, football? Fine games, all of them. More sports for everyone, group, spirit, fun, and you don't have to think, eh? Organize and super sports. More cartoons and books, more pictures. The mind drinks less and less, and patience. Highways full of crowds going somewhere, nowhere. The gasoline refugee. Towns turned into motels, people in nomadic surges from place to place, following the moon tides, living tonight in the room where you slept this noon, and I the night before. Mildred went out of the room and slammed the door. The parlor aunts began to laugh at their parlor uncles. Now let's take up the minorities in our civilization, shall we? Bigger the population, the more minorities. Don't step on the toes of the dog lovers, the cat lovers, doctors, lawyers, merchants, chiefs, Mormons, Baptists, Unitarians, second-generation Chinese, Swedes, Italians, Germans, Texans, Brooklynites, Irishmen, people from Oregon or Mexico. The people in this book, this play, this TV serial are not meant to represent any actual painters, cartographers, mechanics, anywhere. The bigger your market, Montag, the less you handle controversy. Remember that. All the minor minorities with their navels to be kept clean. Authors full of evil thoughts. Lock up your typewriters. They did. Magazines became a nice blend of vanilla tapico. Honestly, I don't know how to pronounce that word. Books, so the damned snobbish critics said, were dishwater. No wonder books stopped selling, the critics said. But the public, knowing what it wanted, spinning happily, let the comic books survive. All the three-dimensional sex magazines, of course. There you have it, Montag. It didn't come from the government down. There was no dictum, no declaration, no censorship to start with. Technology, mass exploitation, and minority pressure carried the trick, thank God. Today, thanks to them, you can stay happy all the time. You're allowed to read comics, the good old confessions, or trade journals. And so basically saying two things here. One is that people became too dumb, essentially, to appreciate a full book because they got so simplified and people got so used to simplified books that they no longer appreciated them. I mean, again, though, think about how often people read in this society. It's really not that crazy. And then the second thing that happened that he details right there is that all these like different minority groups and things, people became uh, so sensitive, I guess. Like there was this fear of offending people because there's so many different kinds of groups that there was fear that if you published a book that offended people, then it would cause a big stir. And so essentially that was another reason why they tried to get rid of books is because you had so many different groups of people and they're afraid of offending them. So again, kind of like the political correctness climate right now, I think you kind of see that. So I think this book's really relevant. Yes, but what about the firemen then? Asked Montag. Ah, Beatty leaned forward in the faint mist of smoke from his pipe. What more easily explained and natural? With school turning out more runners, jumpers, racers, tinkerers, grabbers, snatchers, flyers, and swimmers, instead of examiners, critics, knowers, and imaginative creators, the word intellectual, of course, became a swear word it deserved to be. Gimli's here, by the way. There he is, buddy. He wants to read. Hey, buddy. uh, of course, became the swear word it deserved to be. You always dread the unfamiliar. Surely you remember the boy in your own school class who was exceptionally bright, did most of the reciting and answering while the others sat like so many leaden idols, hating him. And wasn't it this bright boy you selected for beatings and tortures after hours? Of course it was. We must all be alike. Not everyone born free and equal, as the Constitution says, but everyone made equal. Each man the image of every other. Then all are happy, for there are no mountains to make them cower, to judge themselves against. So, a book is a loaded gun in the house next door. Burn it. Take the shot from a weapon. Breach man's mind. Who knows who might be the target of the well-read man? Me? I won't stomach them for a minute. And so when houses were finally fireproofed completely all over the world, you were correct in your assumption the other night. There was no longer need of firemen for the old purposes. They were given a new job, as custodians of our peace of mind, the focus of our understandable and rightful dread of being inferior. Official censors, judges, and executors. That's you, Montag. And that's me. And that right there, folks, is the biggest, I think, reason right here, is there's this pressure to create society equal. If people read, they become smarter. And if you have people that are smarter than others, at least according to Beatty, that creates feelings of anger and inferiority. And if you want to have a happy society, then you want to have people all equal. And so he's saying that's the other reason why we get rid of books. I wish you guys could see this cat. He is so freaking cute. Look at him right now. Look at this little guy. This is the cutest cat. I'm sorry, I know a lot of you guys have cute cats, but Gimli's just a little bit cuter. It's okay. The door to the parlor opened and Mildred stood there looking in at them, looking at Beatty and then at Montag. Behind her the walls of the room were flooded with green and yellow and orange fireworks, sizzling and bursting to some music composed almost completely of trap drums, tom-toms, and cymbals. Her mouth moved and she was saying something, but the sound covered it. Beatty knocked his pipe into the palm of his pink hands, studied the ashes as if they were a symbol to be diagnosed, and searched for meaning. You must understand that our civilization is so vast that we can't have our minorities upset and stirred. Ask yourself, what do we want in this country above all? People want to be happy, isn't that right? Haven't you heard it all your life? I want to be happy, people say. Well, aren't they? Don't we keep them moving? Don't we give them fun? That's all we live for, isn't it? For pleasure, for titillation. And you must admit, our culture provides plenty of these. Yes. Montag could lip read what Mildred was saying in the doorway. He tried not to look at her mouth because then Beatty might turn and read what was there too. Colored people don't like the little black Sambo. Burn it. White people don't feel good about Uncle Tom's Cabin. Burn it. Someone's written a book on tobacco and cancer of the lungs. The cigarette people are weeping. Burn the book. Serenity, Montag. Peace, Montag. Take your fight outside. Better yet, into the incinerator. Funerals are unhappy and pagan. Eliminate them too. 5 minutes after a person is dead, he's on his way to the big flu. The incinerator is served by helicopters all over the country. 10 minutes after a death, a man suspect of black dust. Let's not quibble over individuals with memoriams. Forget them. Burn all. Burn everything. Fire is bright and fire is clean. The fireworks died in the parlor behind Mildred. He's now rubbing his face against the book. He seems to really like to do that, actually. The fireworks died in the parlor behind Mildred. She had stopped talking. At the same time, a miraculous coincidence. Montag held his breath. There was a girl next door, he said slowly. She's gone now, I think, dead. I can't even remember her face, but she was different. How did she happen? Beatty smiled. Here or there, that's bound to occur. Clarice McKellen, we've a record of her family. We've watched them carefully. Heredity and environment are funny things. You can't rid yourself of all the odd ducks in just a few years. The home environment can undo a lot you tried to do at school. That's why we've lowered the kindergarten age year after year until now we're almost snatching them from the cradle. We had some false alarms on the McKellans when they lived in Chicago. Never found a book. Uncle had a mixed record, antisocial. The girl? She was a time bomb. The family had been feeding her subconscious, I'm sure, from what I saw in her school record. She didn't want to know how a thing was done, but why. That can be embarrassing. You ask, Why do a lot of things and you wind up very unhappy indeed if you keep at it? The poor girl's better off dead. Yes, dead. Please don't. Oh god, no. He's sitting on the keyboard. He's just sitting there. Come on, buddy. At least you didn't stop the video this time. Luckily, queer ones like her don't happen often. We know how to nip most of them in the bud early. You can't build a house without nails and wood. If you don't want a house built, hide the nails in wood. If you don't want a man unhappy politically, don't give him two sides to a question to worry him. Give him one. Better yet, give him none. Let him forget there is such thing as war. If the government is inefficient, top-heavy, and tax-mad, better be all those and the people that have to worry about it. Peace, Montag. Give the people contests they win by remembering the words to more popular songs, or the names of state capitals, or how much corn Iowa grew last year. Cram them full of non-combustible data. Chock them so damned full of facts they feel stuffed, but absolutely brilliant with information. Then they'll feel like they're thinking. They'll get a sense of motion without moving, and they'll be happy, because facts of that sort don't change. Don't give them any slippery stuff like philosophy or sociology to tie things up with. That way lies melancholy. Any man who can take a TV wall apart and put it back together again, and most men can nowadays, is happier than any man who tries to slide rule, measure, and equate the universe, which just won't be measured or equated without making man feel bestial and lonely. I know, I've tried it. The hell with it. So bring on your clubs and parties, your acrobats, magicians, your daredevils, jet cars, motorcycle helicopters, your sex and heroin. More of everything to do with automatic reflex. If the drama is bad, if the film says nothing, if the play is hollow, sting me with the theremin loudly. I'll think I'm responding to the play, when it's only a tactile reaction to vibration. But I don't care. I just like solid entertainment. Beatty got up. I must be going. Lecture's over. I hope I've clarified things. The important thing for you to remember, Montag, is we're the Happiness Boys, the Dixie Duo, you and I, and the others. We stand against the small tide of those who want to make everyone unhappy with conflicting theory and thought. We have our fingers in the dike. Hold steady. Don't let the torrent of melancholy and drear philosophy drown our world. We depend on you. I don't think you realize how important you are, we are, to our happy world as it stands now. And that right there, folks, I think is also just the biggest purpose of this, is that they think that if you have people with different thoughts, different ideas, that can breed unhappiness because people question things, right? They don't want people to question things. They want people to just accept society for how it is. And so, in a way, burning books, as you've probably guessed from the start, is just kind of a form of thought control. And that's what this is really all about. One thing I'll ask you guys tomorrow, by the way, do you feel like there are any positives to a society like this, especially considering the state of things right now? Beatty shook Montag's limp hand. Montag still sat, as if the house were collapsing about him, and he could not move in the bed. Mildred had vanished from the door. "One last thing," said Beatty. "At least once in his career every fireman gets an itch. What do the books say, he wonders? Oh, to scratch that itch, eh? Well, Montag, take my word for it, I've had to read a few in my time to know what I was about, and the books say nothing. Nothing you can teach or believe. They're about non-existent people, figments of imagination, if they're fiction. And if they're non-fiction, it's worse. One professor calling another an idiot, or a philosopher screaming down another's gullet. All of them running about, putting out the stars and extinguishing the sun. You come away lost. Well then, what if a fireman accidentally, really not intending anything, takes a book home with him?" Montag twitched. The open door looked at him with its great vacant eye. "A natural air, curiosity alone," said Beatty. "We don't get over anxious or mad. We let the fireman keep the book 24 hours. If he hasn't burned it by then, we simply come burn it for him." "Of course." Montag's mouth was dry. "Well, Montag, will you take another later shift today? Will we see you tonight, perhaps?" I don't know, said Montag. What? B looked faintly surprised. Montag shut his eyes. I'll be in later. Maybe. We'd certainly miss you if you didn't show, said Beatty, putting his pipe in his pocket thoughtfully. I'll never come in again, thought Montag. Get well and keep well, said Beatty. He turned and went out through the open door. Montag watched the window as Beatty drove away in his gleaming yellow flame-colored Beetle with the black char-colored tires. Across the street and down the way, the other houses stood with their flat fronts. What was it Clarice had said one afternoon? No front porches. My uncle says there used to be front porches. And people sat there sometimes at night, talking when they wanted to talk, rocking and not talking when they didn't want to talk. Sometimes they just sat there and thought about things, turned things over. My uncle says the architects got rid of the front porches because they didn't look well. But my uncle says they were merely rationalizing it. The real reason, hidden underneath, might be they didn't want people sitting like that, doing nothing, rocking, talking. That was the wrong kind of social life. People talked too much, and they had time to think. So they ran off with the porches and the gardens too. Not many gardens anymore to sit around in. And look at the furniture. No rocking chairs anymore. They're too comfortable. Get people up and running around. My uncle says, and my uncle, and my uncle. Her voice faded. All right, really interesting portion of the book. We'll definitely talk about that tomorrow. Otherwise, you guys have a great rest of your day.